The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty town square of Redemption Creek, where a crowd had gathered like vultures, circling carrion. It was auction day, not for cattle or land, but for something far more desperate: human labor. Convicted men, their crimes ranging from petty theft to murder, stood chained behind iron bars on a makeshift stage, waiting to be sold into indentured servitude rather than facing the gallows. Clara Big Red Vance stood at the edge of the jeering crowd, her massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the smaller folk around her. At 6 feet, 3 inches tall, with shoulders broad as a barn door, she was impossible to miss. Her wild mane of copper-red hair caught the sunlight like fire, and her hands, calloused and scarred from years of ranch work, hung at her sides in tight fists. She had come here with a single purpose, though the shame of it burned in her chest like hot coals. "Step right up, ladies and gentlemen," barked Sheriff Mulligan, his mustache twitching with self-importance. "Next, we have lot number 7, Jericho Cole, known in these parts as the Ghost." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by nervous laughter. Several people actually took steps backward. The man who emerged from the shadows of the prisoner wagon didn't look particularly frightening at first glance. He was lean, almost gaunt, with dark hair that fell across eyes the color of winter steel. Scars crisscrossed his exposed forearms, and there was something in the way he moved, fluid, predatory, like a rattlesnake coiled to strike, that made grown men touch the guns at their hips. "Convicted of murder in El Paso," the sheriff continued, though his voice had lost some of its bluster. "Sentenced to hang, but the judge in his mercy has offered labor servitude instead. Strong back, good with horses and a gun, starting bid is $5. Silence. The sheriff cleared his throat. $4? More silence. Someone coughed. A baby cried in the distance. $3 then. Come now, this is a strong man. "He'll kill you in your sleep," called out Tobias Mercer, the town's wealthiest rancher. "Everyone knows the Ghost don't take orders from nobody. Whoever buys him is buying their own death warrant." Jericho Cole's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. He said nothing, but his eyes scanned the crowd with an intensity that made people avert their gazes. $2! The sheriff's face was reddening now. "Surely someone needs—" $1. The voice that cut through the murmuring crowd was deep, rough as gravel, and unmistakably feminine. Everyone turned to stare as Clara Vance pushed her way forward. Men stumbled aside, some from the sheer physical space she occupied, others from the social discomfort her presence created. "Did I stutter?" Clara said, her green eyes blazing. "I said $1. Laughter erupted, cruel, mocking laughter that Clara had heard her entire life. "Look at that! The giant woman finally found herself a man," someone shouted. "She's gonna make him her pet. Or eat him for dinner. More likely, she'll crush him on their wedding night." Clara's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that showing pain only fed the wolves. Instead, she reached into her worn leather vest and pulled out a single silver dollar, the last one she had to her name, and slammed it onto the auction block with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. $1, she repeated, her voice steady, "and I want the papers signed today." Sheriff Mulligan looked uncertain, glancing between Clara and the prisoner. "Miss Vance, are you certain? This man is dangerous." "I asked if anyone was bidding higher," Clara interrupted. "No? Then we have a deal." For the first time, Jericho Cole spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried. "Ma'am, I appreciate the rescue from the noose, but you should know, I ain't much for following orders." Clara met his gaze without flinching. Up close, she realized he was actually several inches shorter than her, lean where she was solid, all wire and coiled tension where she was raw power. Something flickered in those cold eyes, not fear, not contempt, but curiosity. "I don't need someone who follows orders," Clara said. "I need someone who can shoot straight and work hard. Everything else we'll figure out." A strange, unsettling smile crossed Jericho's face. "Then I reckon we have ourselves an arrangement." As the sheriff reluctantly processed the paperwork, transferring ownership of Jericho Cole's labor, and by the laws of the time essentially his entire existence, to Clara Vance for the princely sum of $1. Neither of them noticed the well-dressed man watching from the saloon window across the street. Mayor Silas Blackwood ground his cigar between his teeth, his eyes narrowing. This was an unexpected complication. The ride back to the Vance ranch was conducted in complete silence. Clara drove the wagon while Jericho sat in the back, still shackled at the wrists, studying the landscape with those unsettling eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The ranch, when it finally came into view, was a study in decay and determination. The main house was sturdy enough. Her father had built it to last, but the barn listed to one side, fences had gaps wide enough for cattle to wander through, and the fields that should have been green with crops were brown and parched despite it being spring. "Water troubles?" Jericho asked, breaking the silence. Clara glanced back, surprised he'd noticed. "Wells started drying up 2 years ago. Same time Pa died. Cattle prices dropped, crops failed, and every bank in 3 counties suddenly wanted their loans repaid immediately. Convenient timing. I thought so, too." Clara pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "But when you're a woman trying to run a ranch alone, nobody much cares what you think." She climbed down and unlocked Jericho's shackles. He rubbed his wrists, studying the crude iron marks they'd left behind, then looked up at her with that penetrating gaze. "Why'd you really buy me, Miss Vance?" Clara considered lying, then decided he'd see through it anyway. "Because I'm desperate. The Blackwood Land Company has been trying to force me to sell for 2 years. They've cut off my water rights, paid the local stores not to sell to me, and last month 3 of their men came by to encourage me to sign the papers." She touched her ribs unconsciously, where the bruises had finally faded. "I can fight Mr. Cole, and I can outwork any man in this county. But I can't be everywhere at once, and I can't watch my back while I'm sleeping." "So, you bought yourself a guard dog." "I bought myself a partner," Clara corrected. "I don't expect you to be loyal. I know that costs more than $1. But I'm offering you food, shelter, and a place to hide until your name cools down. In exchange, I need you to help me keep this ranch until I can get a harvest in and pay off the bank. After that, you're free to go wherever you want." Jericho was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he extended his hand. "That's a fair deal, but I got one condition." "What's that?" "You teach me everything about this land, the water sources, the property lines, the town politics, all of it." Clara frowned. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to protect something, I need to understand it." That strange smile again. "Call it professional pride." They shook hands. Clara's grip could have crushed walnuts, but Jericho, didn't flinch. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara learned that Jericho Cole was a man of contradictions. He worked from dawn until dusk without complaint, repairing fences, tending horses, and patching the barn roof with an efficiency that surprised her. He was quiet, speaking only when necessary, but when he did speak, his words were carefully chosen and often unsettling in their insight. He was also, she discovered, completely unafraid of her. In a lifetime of being too big, too strong, too much for the fragile masculinity of frontier men to handle, Clara had grown accustomed to a certain type of interaction. Men either mocked her from a safe distance or avoided her entirely. The few who'd shown interest had wanted to tame her, to prove their dominance over the giant woman. Jericho did none of these things. He didn't try to outwork her or prove his strength. When she lifted a beam he couldn't budge, he simply nodded and moved on to a task better suited to his skills. When she asked his opinion, he gave it honestly without the patronizing tone she'd learned to expect. It was strange and strangely pleasant, but there were warning signs, too. Clara noticed that Jericho never slept in the small bunkhouse she'd shown him. Instead, he'd made himself a bedroll in the barn's hayloft, where he had a clear view of both the approach road and the house. She'd caught him more than once standing watch at odd hours, his hand never far from the rifle she'd given him. And then there was the map. It happened on the 15th night. Clara had been unable to sleep, troubled by nightmares of losing the ranch, and had risen to make herself some coffee. Through the kitchen window she saw lamplight in the barn. Curious and slightly alarmed, she grabbed her shotgun and crept outside. The barn door was ajar, and through the crack she could see Jericho bent over a makeshift table, working by candlelight. He was drawing. Clara eased the door open, and the hinges betrayed her with a creak. Jericho's hand flew to his gun with rattlesnake speed, then relaxed when he saw who it was. "Can't sleep?" he asked mildly, as if being caught doing something suspicious was perfectly normal. Clara stepped closer, and her breath caught. Spread across the table was an intricately detailed map of Redemption Creek and the surrounding area. But this wasn't a simple sketch. It was a tactical diagram, complete with annotations, measurements, and symbols that looked military in nature. "What is this?" she demanded, raising the shotgun slightly. Jericho didn't seem concerned by the weapon. "Information." "For what purpose?" He studied her for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Sit down, Clara. There's something you need to know." The use of her first name, casual and unexpected, startled her into compliance. She sat on a hay bale, shotgun across her knees, and waited. "You asked me why I needed to understand this land," Jericho began. "The truth is, I started looking into your situation the day after the auction. Asked some questions in town, talked to a few people who weren't afraid of the ghost." His smile was grim. "Turns out, your water trouble ain't natural, and it ain't random." He pointed to the map, specifically to a section that represented her ranch. "Your father's land sits directly above an underground aquifer, a big one. Most people don't know it's there, but someone figured it out. Someone with money and resources." "Blackwood?" Clara breathed. "Mayor Silas Blackwood," Jericho confirmed. "He's been buying up land all around yours for the past 3 years. Every property owner who refused to sell mysteriously faced the same problems you did: dried wells, failed crops, harassment. Most of them gave in, but not your father and not you." Clara's hands tightened on the shotgun. "How do you know all this?" "Because I'm very good at finding things out," Jericho said quietly. "It's why I was worth something before I ended up on that auction block. And it's why I know that Blackwood isn't going to stop with harassment. He can't afford to. If word gets out about that aquifer, your land becomes worth 10 times what he's offered. He needs you gone, Clara. Soon." The barn seemed suddenly colder. "So you're saying—" "I'm saying that buying me wasn't enough. Defending this ranch from a few hired thugs won't be enough." Jericho's eyes were hard as flint. "Blackwood has the law, the money, and the power in this town. If you want to keep this land, you're going to have to do more than survive. You're going to have to fight back." "I'm one woman," Clara said, hating how defeated she sounded. "What can I do against the mayor and all his resources?" For the first time since she'd met him, Jericho Cole's smile was genuine and absolutely terrifying. "You're not one woman," he said. "You're a giant, and you just bought yourself a ghost. Together, Miss Vance, I think we can make this entire corrupt town very, very sorry they ever underestimated either of us." Clara didn't sleep at all that night. She sat in the barn with Jericho as he laid out his plan, piece by piece, detail by terrible detail. "You're insane," she said finally, though there was admiration in her voice despite herself. "Probably," Jericho agreed, "but answer me this. If you play by their rules, if you try to fight legal and proper, what happens?" Clara knew the answer. "I lose. The banks foreclose, Blackwood gets my land for pennies, and I end up somewhere, doing something, if I'm lucky. And if you don't play by their rules," she met his gaze, "I could end up dead or in prison." "True," Jericho acknowledged, "but you could also win, really win. Not just keep the ranch, but break Blackwood's hold on this whole territory, free up all those other ranchers he's been squeezing, become something more than the woman they mocked at that auction." "Become what?" His smile was sharp as a knife blade. "A legend." The plan Jericho had devised was audacious to the point of madness, but as he explained it, Clara began to see the terrible genius of it. Step one was already in motion. Jericho had been documenting everything. Every illegal action by Blackwood's men, every suspicious financial transaction, every dirty secret the mayor thought was safely buried. He'd been remarkably busy for a man who'd only been free for 2 weeks. "How did you get all this?" Clara asked, studying the pages of notes and documents. "Turns out people get real talkative when the ghost asks them questions," Jericho said dryly. "Also helps that I used to run with some outlaws who taught me how to pick locks and read upside-down documents on officials' desks. Step 2 was the bold part. They were going to fortify the ranch, not just repair it, transform it into a genuine stronghold. Blackwood will come for you," Jericho explained, "probably within the month, once he realizes you're not breaking. When he does, this place needs to be defensible. We'll reinforce the house, dig fighting positions, create clear lines of sight. Make it so damn difficult to take that he'll have to either give up or commit resources that'll draw attention he can't afford." "And step 3? Clara asked, though part of her was afraid to know. Jericho's expression went cold. "We take the fight to him, hit his businesses, expose his corruption, turn the town against him. He's built his empire on fear and secrets. We burn both to the ground." "That's not defense," Clara said quietly. "That's war." "Yes," Jericho agreed, "it is. And I won't lie to you, Clara, people are going to get hurt. maybe killed. If you go down this path, there's no going back. You'll never be just a rancher again. You'll be the woman who stood up to power and won, or the woman who tried and failed spectacularly. Clara stood and walked to the barn door, staring out at the pre-dawn darkness. Her ranch, her father's legacy, sprawled before her in all its broken glory. She thought about her father, who'd built this place with his bare hands, about her mother, who died when Clara was 12, whispering that being big was a gift, not a curse, about every man who'd ever laughed at her, feared her, or tried to make her small, about spending the rest of her life running, hiding, diminishing herself to fit into spaces that were never meant for her. "Teach me," she said finally, turning back to Jericho. "Teach me how to fight, not just with my fists. I already know that. Teach me how to shoot like you do, how to think like you do, how to be dangerous." Something flickered in Jericho's eyes, respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "There's no going back from this," he warned one last time. Clara's smile was fierce. "Good. I'm tired of going backward." The transformation began immediately. While continuing their normal ranch work, maintaining the appearance that nothing had changed, Jericho and Clara worked in secret to prepare for war. He taught her to shoot and discovered she had a natural talent for it. Her hands, so steady from years of hard labor, didn't tremble. Her eyes, accustomed to spotting strays at a distance, could pick out targets others missed. "You're holding back," Jericho observed one afternoon as they practiced behind the barn. "Stop thinking about the target like something fragile. When the time comes, it'll be men trying to kill you. You need to be ready." Clara adjusted her grip on the rifle, breathed, and fired. The bottle on the fence post exploded. "Better," Jericho said with approval. But the training went both ways. Clara taught Jericho about the land, where the water really ran, where the aquifer was closest to the surface, which boundaries were legally disputed and which were just assumed. "Your father was smarter than people gave him credit for," Jericho observed one evening as they rode the property lines. "He never officially filed some of these water rights, which means they can't be legally transferred or seized. Pa always said the land would take care of us if we took care of it," Clara said. "Guess he was planning ahead." As days turned to weeks, something else began to change between them. Clara found herself watching Jericho when he didn't know she was looking. The efficient way he moved, the rare moments when his cold exterior cracked and something almost warm showed through. And Jericho, for his part, seemed to see her in ways no one ever had, not as too big, too strong, too much, but as exactly right. When she hoisted a beam he couldn't lift, he didn't look embarrassed or emasculated. He looked impressed, approving. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. One evening, as they were reinforcing the windows of the main house, Clara finally asked the question that had been haunting her. "Why are you really doing this, Jericho? You could have run by now. There's nothing keeping you here." He paused in his work, hammer suspended in mid-air. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "When they arrested me in El Paso," he said finally, "it was for killing a man. What they didn't care about was why. The man I killed had murdered a Mexican family for their land, a mother, a father, 3 children. Nobody was going to do anything about it because they were poor and foreign and didn't matter to the law." He set down the hammer and looked at her directly. "I've done bad things in my life, Clara. I won't pretend otherwise. But I'm tired of watching powerful men crush everyone in their path and call it progress. Maybe I can't fix the world, but I can help you fix this corner of it. And maybe that's enough." Clara felt something crack open in her chest, a feeling she'd learned to bury years ago. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for seeing me as someone worth helping." Jericho's expression softened in a way she'd never seen before. "You know what I saw when I looked at you from that auction block? A giant woman desperate enough to buy a condemned man?" "No," he said. "I saw someone who walked into a hostile crowd alone, who faced down their mockery without flinching, who knew what she needed and took it despite everything. I saw someone strong enough to carry the weight the world put on her shoulders and brave enough to ask for help when she needed it. That's not desperation, Clara. That's courage." They stood in the gathering darkness, inches apart, and for a moment Clara thought, but Jericho stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself. "We should finish before nightfall. Blackwood's men have been watching the property lines. Won't be long now." He was right about that. The attack came 3 nights later. The sound that woke Clara wasn't loud, just the soft creak of a floorboard that should have been empty. Years of sleeping alone in an isolated ranch had trained her to wake at the slightest anomaly. Her hand found the rifle beside her bed in the darkness. She rolled silently to the floor, pressing her back against the wall just as the bedroom door burst open and 3 men rushed in. They expected to find her asleep. Instead, they found themselves staring down the barrel of her Winchester. "Wrong room, boys," Clara said, and fired. The shot went wide. She'd aimed to miss, wanting answers more than bodies, but it sent the intruders scrambling. More gunfire erupted from outside, and Clara realized this wasn't a simple break-in. This was an assault. Jericho had been right. Blackwood had come for her. Clara grabbed her gun belt and ran for the stairs, her size for once an advantage as she barreled through a 4th attacker trying to climb up. He went tumbling backward with a scream, and Clara didn't wait to see if he got up. Outside was chaos. At least a dozen men surrounded the house, some with torches, others with guns. The barn was already burning. They'd started there, probably hoping to trap her between fire and bullets. And there, emerging from the smoke like something from a nightmare, was Jericho. Clara had seen him practice shooting. She'd seen him move with that predatory grace that suggested danger, but she'd never seen him actually fight. It was beautiful and terrible. Jericho moved through Blackwood's men like a ghost indeed. Now you saw him, now he'd vanished, and someone was screaming. He didn't waste bullets. Every shot counted, every movement economical. He wasn't trying to kill them all. He was creating chaos, making them afraid, breaking their coordination. But there were too many. Clara saw one of them draw a bead on Jericho's back while he was engaged with 2 others. Without thinking, she raised her rifle and fired. The would-be shooter dropped, clutching his shoulder. Jericho's head snapped around, and their eyes met across the firelit chaos. He nodded once. Acknowledgement, gratitude, partnership. And then they were fighting back to back, her raw power complementing his lethal precision. "The well!" Jericho shouted. "They're planting something at the well!" Clara understood immediately. Destroy the well, and the ranch became truly uninhabitable. She'd have to sell. "Cover me!" she shouted back, and ran. What happened next would become legend in Redemption Creek. told and retold with growing embellishment over the years. But the core truth was always the same. Clara Vance, all 6'3" and 200 pounds of her, charged across the ranch yard like an avenging fury. 3 men tried to stop her. She knocked the first aside with a backhand that sent him flying. The second got the stock of her rifle in his face. The third managed to get his hands on her, trying to wrestle her down. He might as well have tried to wrestle a bear. Clara lifted him bodily. He had to weigh 170 pounds at least, and threw him into 2 of his companions. They went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. At the well, she found 2 men frantically working on what looked like a bundle of dynamite rigged to drop into the shaft. Clara didn't hesitate. She grabbed the first man by his belt and collar and literally tossed him away from the well. The second turned with a pistol. He never got a shot off. Clara's massive hand closed around his wrist and squeezed. Bones cracked. The gun fell, and the man screamed. She ripped the dynamite away from the well and threw it as far as her considerable strength could manage. It exploded in midair over an empty field, a fountain of fire and thunder that seemed to pause the entire battle. In that moment of shocked silence, Jericho's voice rang out clear and cold. "Next man who moves dies." Everyone froze. Jericho stood on the porch, rifle aimed, with 3 of Blackwood's men already down around him. The fire from the barn cast his shadow long and dark across the ranch yard. Clara stood by the well, breathing hard, her red hair wild in the firelight, looking every inch the giant the town had always called her. The remaining attackers looked at each other. Whatever they'd been paid, it wasn't enough for this. They ran. Dawn found Clara and Jericho sitting on the porch steps, exhausted, covered in soot and blood, none of it theirs. The barn was a total loss, still smoking. The house was damaged but standing. 4 of Blackwood's men were tied up in the yard, groaning and awaiting the sheriff. "That went about as well as could be expected," Jericho observed dryly. Clara let out a laugh that was half sob. "We could have died. But we didn't." He looked at her seriously. "You saved my life tonight. Thank you. You saved mine first. Then I suppose we're even." He smiled slightly. "Partners." The word settled over them like a benediction. Sheriff Mulligan arrived an hour later with a small posse, summoned by one of the neighbors who'd seen the fire. He looked between Clara, Jericho, and the prisoners with an expression of deep exhaustion. "Someone want to tell me what happened here?" Clara told him. All of it. The attack, the attempted dynamiting, the men who'd fled. She also gave him copies of the documents Jericho had compiled, proof of Blackwood's illegal water diversion, records of bribery, connections to other suspicious attacks on ranchers. This is extensive," Mulligan said, flipping through the papers with growing alarm. "Where did you get all this?" "I'm very motivated," Clara said simply. "The question is, Sheriff, what are you going to do about it?" Mulligan looked uncomfortable. "Mayor Blackwood is a powerful man, Miss Vance." "And I'm a very large woman," Clara replied, "with a very dangerous partner and nothing left to lose. So I'll ask again, what are you going to do about it?" The sheriff sighed. "I'll do my job. Can't promise more than that." It was enough. Barely. The next week saw Redemption Creek tear itself apart. Blackwood, facing arrest, tried to flee but was caught at the border. His trial exposed a web of corruption that implicated half the town council. Property seized through fraud was returned to its rightful owners, water rights were restored, and through it all, Clara and Jericho worked to rebuild the ranch, now on firmer legal and financial ground than ever before. 3 months after the battle, Clara stood in the newly rebuilt barn, watching Jericho prepare his horse. The ranch was secure now. The danger had passed. Their deal, by any reasonable interpretation, was fulfilled. He was leaving. "You don't have to go," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. Jericho paused in tightening his saddle. "Clara—" "I know," she interrupted. "I know we had a deal. Food and shelter until the trouble passed. You kept your end, more than kept it. You saved this ranch. You saved my life. I just—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the hollow feeling in her chest. Jericho turned to face her fully. In his hand was a single silver dollar. "Recognize this?" he asked. Clara stared at it. Her dollar, the one she'd used to buy him at auction. "I've been carrying it since that day," Jericho said quietly, "trying to figure out what it meant, what I was worth, what you were buying." He walked toward her, and Clara, who'd faced down armed men without flinching, felt her heart hammering. "I've finally figured it out," he continued. "You weren't buying a slave or a guard dog or even a partner. You were buying a chance, $1 worth of hope that maybe you didn't have to face everything alone." He pressed the coin into her palm and closed her fingers around it. "The contract is over," Jericho said. "I'm a free man. No debts, no obligations." His winter steel eyes met hers, and Clara saw something in them she'd never quite let herself believe before. Warmth, affection, maybe even love. "So, I'm here to ask you, Clara Vance, not as a bought man, but as a free one. Will you have me? Not as an employee or a temporary partner, but as something permanent?" Clara's breath caught. "You mean—" "I mean I'd like to court you proper," Jericho said. And now he was smiling that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. "I'd like to rebuild this ranch with you. Stand beside you, not because I owe you, but because there's nowhere else I'd rather be. I'd like to teach the whole damn territory that the giant woman and the ghost cowboy are a force of nature, and God help anyone who crosses them." Tears, actual tears, something Clara thought she'd forgotten how to produce, welled in her eyes. "I'm too tall," she said, half laughing. "I'm bigger than you. People will laugh." "Let them," Jericho said fiercely. "I don't love you despite your size, Clara. I love you because of it. Because you're strong enough to carry the weight of the world and gentle enough to care about doing it right. Because you faced down a hostile crowd and bought a condemned man with your last dollar, not knowing if it would save you or destroy you. Because when I look at you, I don't see someone too big. I see someone finally, perfectly big enough." Clara pulled him close, gently, always aware of her strength but no longer ashamed of it, and kissed him. He wrapped his arms around her as far as they would go, and it was right. It was perfect. It was everything she'd never let herself dream of. When they finally broke apart, Clara pressed the silver dollar back into his hand. "Keep it," she said. "Remind me that the best investment I ever made cost a single dollar and bought me everything I never knew I needed." Jericho laughed, a sound she was determined to hear more often, and tucked the coin into his vest pocket, right over his heart.